Dogs are everywhere in human life. They sleep in our homes, walk beside us in the streets, protect us, comfort us, and in many cases understand us better than other humans do. But despite this close relationship, dogs remain one of the most misunderstood animals on Earth. In today's video, we're diving deep into the world of dogs with 100 carefully researched facts, each one fully explained and designed to slowly reveal just how complex, emotional, intelligent, and ancient these animals truly are. This is a long, calm, and immersive experience, perfect to listen to while relaxing, studying, or falling asleep. If you enjoy content like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and explore our other long-form videos. Let's begin with the first fact. Dogs were not simply tamed by humans in a deliberate or planned way. Their domestication was a slow, mutual process that began tens of thousands of years ago, long before agriculture or permanent settlements existed. Early humans lived as nomadic hunter-gatherers, and certain wolves began to linger near their camps, attracted by food waste and the relative safety humans provided. These wolves were not the strongest or most aggressive, but the most tolerant and curious. Over generations, natural selection favored individuals that could coexist with humans without fear or hostility. Gradually, these wolves became genetically and behaviorally distinct from their wild counterparts. This makes dogs the first animal ever domesticated by humans, not as tools or livestock, but as social partners. Importantly, this process shaped both species. Humans gained protection, assistance in hunting, and early warning systems, while dogs gained reliable access to food and shelter. This shared evolutionary path created a bond that is unique in the animal kingdom, one based not on dominance, but on cooperation and mutual adaptation. As dogs evolved alongside humans, they developed an extraordinary ability to read human emotional states. Unlike most animals, dogs do not rely on a single cue such as voice or posture. Instead, they integrate facial expressions, tone of voice, movement patterns, and even changes in breathing. Research has shown that dogs can distinguish between happy, angry, sad, and neutral human faces, and that they react differently to each emotional expression. When humans are stressed or upset, dogs often respond with behaviors associated with concern, such as staying close, moving more slowly, or maintaining soft eye contact. This sensitivity is not accidental. Dogs that could accurately interpret human emotions were better able to predict behavior and avoid danger. Over time, this ability became deeply ingrained. It is one of the main reasons dogs function so effectively as therapy and support animals. They do not need explicit training to notice emotional shifts. They are biologically tuned to them. A major foundation of how dogs experience the world is their sense of smell, which is vastly more developed than that of humans. Dogs possess hundreds of millions of olfactory receptors, compared to only a few million in humans. The portion of the canine brain dedicated to processing scent is also proportionally far larger. For dogs, smell is not just an added sense, it is the primary way they understand reality. Through scent, dogs can identify individuals, detect emotional states, determine how recently another animal passed through an area, and recognize subtle changes in health. This ability explains why dogs are used to detect medical conditions such as cancer or drops in blood sugar. Smell also forms the basis of memory for dogs. Where humans remember places visually, dogs remember them chemically. Every environment is layered with invisible information that tells a continuous story about what has happened there. This deep sensory and emotional processing continues even when dogs are asleep. Like humans, dogs experience REM sleep, the stage associated with dreaming. During this phase, their brains show activity patterns similar to wakefulness, and their bodies may twitch, their paws may move, or they may quietly vocalize. These behaviors suggest that dogs are replaying experiences from their waking life. Puppies, who are constantly learning, spend more time in REM sleep than adult dogs, indicating that dreaming plays a role in memory consolidation. Smaller dogs tend to dream more frequently, while larger dogs dream for longer stretches. Dreaming allows dogs to process emotional and social experiences, reinforcing learning and coping with stress. This further highlights how closely canine cognition parallels human cognition. Dogs do not simply react to the world moment by moment. They reflect on it, process it, and integrate it, even while asleep. Dogs are capable of experiencing jealousy-like emotional responses, despite the long-standing belief that such emotions are uniquely human. This becomes evident when dogs perceive a threat to an established social bond, especially one involving their primary human. In controlled behavioral studies, dogs consistently show stress behaviors when their owner gives attention to another dog, even when that dog is artificial or clearly not alive. These behaviors include pushing between the owner and the perceived rival, vocalizing increased physical proximity, or attempts to redirect attention. Importantly, these reactions are specific to social attention, not to food or toys, which indicates that the response is relational rather than resource-based. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. Dogs evolved in cooperative social systems where maintaining access to key social partners was directly tied to survival. Losing attention could mean losing protection, guidance, or resources. Neurologically, these responses are driven by emotional processing centers linked to attachment and expectation. Dogs are not comparing themselves abstractly, but they are reacting to disruption in a familiar social pattern. This emotional response reinforces the idea that dogs do not merely coexist with humans. They form exclusive social bonds that they actively try to preserve. Dogs also age in a fundamentally different way than humans, and the common idea that 1 dog year equals 7 human years is biologically inaccurate. Canine aging follows a nonlinear pattern that varies significantly based on size, breed, and metabolic rate. Dogs mature extremely quickly during their first years of life, reaching social and reproductive maturity far earlier than humans. After this rapid early phase, aging slows, but the rate still differs dramatically between small and large dogs. Larger dogs age faster at the cellular level, partly due to accelerated growth and increased oxidative stress, which contributes to shorter lifespans. Smaller dogs, with slower growth rates, tend to live significantly longer. Modern research using DNA methylation markers has shown that canine aging cannot be translated using a simple formula. Instead, aging reflects complex biological trade-offs. Understanding this helps explain why health care, nutrition, and activity needs change so quickly in dogs, especially in early life. Dogs do not simply get older faster. They pass through life stages on a different biological timeline. Another critical aspect of canine cognition is how dogs form memories. Dogs do not remember events as detailed narratives. Instead, they retain emotional summaries of experiences. What matters most to a dog is not exactly what happened, but how it felt and what the outcome was. This emotional memory system allows dogs to make fast decisions without cognitive overload. If an experience was frightening, calming, painful, or reassuring, that emotional tag remains strongly encoded even after details fade. This is why dogs may react strongly to a place, sound, or person without an obvious reason. The emotional memory is still active. Neurologically, this type of memory relies heavily on the amygdala and associated structures, which prioritize emotional relevance over detail. This system is efficient and adaptive, but it also means that repeated negative emotional experiences can have long-lasting effects. Conversely, consistent positive emotional experiences build deep trust. Dogs remember feelings, and those feelings quietly guide future behavior. Finally, dogs experience time in a fundamentally different way from humans. They do not understand time abstractly, but they are extremely sensitive to patterns that signal the passage of time. Dogs rely on routines, environmental cues, and internal biological rhythms to anticipate events. Changes in light, household sounds, human behavior, and even the fading of human scent provide information about how much time has passed. This is why dogs can anticipate meals, walks, or their owner's return with surprising accuracy. They are not counting hours, they are reading patterns. Disruptions to these patterns often cause stress, not because dogs miss a specific event, but because their predictive model of the day breaks down. Time perception in dogs is functional rather than conceptual. They live in the present, but their present is structured by expectation. Predictable patterns create calm, while unpredictable schedules increase vigilance. For dogs, understanding time is about knowing what comes next. Dogs are far more socially intelligent than many people assume, particularly when it comes to understanding human intention. They do not evaluate human actions solely based on outcomes, but also on the perceived intent behind those actions. Behavioral experiments have shown that dogs react differently when a human deliberately withholds something versus when the same result occurs accidentally. When an action is clearly intentional, dogs are more likely to show frustration, avoidance, or reduced engagement. When the outcome is accidental, dogs often remain patient and attentive, waiting for correction. This distinction is based on subtle cues such as hesitation, body language, timing, and facial expression. Over repeated interactions, dogs learn what intentional behavior looks like and adjust their emotional responses accordingly. This ability likely evolved because recognizing intention reduced social conflict and improved cooperation. In everyday life, this explains why dogs often tolerate clumsiness or mistakes but react negatively to deliberate exclusion or inconsistency. Dogs are not moral judges, but they are skilled interpreters of social intent, and this skill plays a crucial role in how trust is formed and maintained. Dogs also experience frustration in a very specific cognitive way that is often misunderstood. Frustration does not arise simply because a dog is denied something, but because an expected sequence of events is interrupted or blocked. When a dog predicts an outcome based on learned patterns and that outcome fails to occur, emotional tension builds rapidly. This is especially common in dogs bred for problem-solving or task-oriented work. Neurologically, frustration is tied to prediction error signals that activate stress responses when expectations are violated. This can manifest as whining, pacing, loss of focus, or sudden disengagement. Importantly, repeated frustration without resolution can erode motivation and emotional stability. Managing frustration effectively requires clear structure, gradual increases in difficulty, and consistent feedback. Dogs do not struggle because they lack ability. They struggle when the mental flow they rely on is repeatedly disrupted. Frustration in dogs is not misbehavior, it is cognitive overload. Another often overlooked aspect of canine behavior is how dogs organize humans into functional social roles rather than treating all individuals as equal partners. Dogs categorize people based on repeated interaction patterns, such as who provides food, who offers comfort, who initiates play, and who sets boundaries. These roles help dogs navigate complex social environments efficiently. Once a role is established, expectations become stable, reducing cognitive effort. A dog may seek reassurance from one person while responding to direction from another, not because of favoritism, but because each person occupies a different role within the dog's social framework. When roles suddenly change, confusion and stress can occur until new patterns are learned. This role-based perception reflects efficient social cognition shaped by domestication. Dogs simplify human relationships into functional categories that allow them to respond quickly and appropriately. Understanding this helps explain why dogs behave differently with different people while remaining the same individual internally. Dogs are also extremely sensitive to physical space and use distance as a primary form of communication. How close a dog positions itself relative to a human or another animal conveys emotional state, trust, and intent. Approaching closely can signal affection or request support, while maintaining distance can indicate uncertainty or a need for reduced stimulation. Dogs continuously adjust proximity based on context, emotional arousal, and social dynamics. This spatial regulation helps prevent conflict by allowing dogs to manage interaction intensity without confrontation. Humans often overlook or override these signals, unintentionally increasing stress. Forcing closeness or ignoring distancing cues removes a dog's ability to self-regulate. Respecting spatial communication builds trust and emotional safety. For dogs, distance is not avoidance or attachment alone. It is a flexible tool for emotional regulation and social harmony. Dogs experience boredom not as a simple surplus of energy, but as a cognitive imbalance caused by insufficient mental engagement. In natural settings, dogs spent much of their time exploring, problem-solving, tracking scents, and coordinating socially. These activities continuously activated the brain's exploratory and reward systems. In modern environments, physical needs may be met while cognitive needs remain largely unaddressed. When this happens, boredom emerges as a psychological state rather than a physical one. A bored dog may chew objects, bark excessively, fixate on movement, or pace repetitively. These behaviors are often labeled as disobedience, but they are better understood as attempts to stimulate an underengaged mind. Neurologically, boredom corresponds to reduced activation in circuits responsible for curiosity and satisfaction. Mental enrichment, such as scent-based activities, learning new tasks, or navigating novel environments, restores balance far more effectively than physical exhaustion alone. Long-term cognitive deprivation can lead to chronic stress and reduced emotional resilience. Addressing boredom is therefore not about tiring the dog out, but about giving the brain meaningful work. When the mind is engaged, behavior stabilizes naturally. Vocal communication in dogs is far more flexible and intentional than it appears on the surface. Dogs do not bark, whine, or growl randomly. They actively modify their vocalizations depending on context, audience, and expected response. A bark directed at a stranger differs acoustically from one aimed at a familiar human. Alarm barks tend to be short, repetitive, and urgent, while attention-seeking vocalizations are often higher in pitch and more variable. Dogs learn through experience which sounds produce specific outcomes. If a certain vocal pattern reliably brings attention or assistance, it becomes reinforced. Growling also varies significantly. Play growls and defensive growls are acoustically distinct, and dogs can reliably distinguish between them. Humans often misinterpret these sounds because they focus on the noise itself rather than context and body language. This vocal adaptability reflects advanced social learning shaped by domestication. Dogs have learned that sound influences human behavior, and they use it strategically. Vocalization is not noise. It is a tool. Sniffing plays a central role in emotional regulation for dogs, far beyond its function in information gathering. When dogs sniff, measurable physiological changes occur, including reduced heart rate and lowered stress markers. Sniffing activates brain regions associated with focused exploration, shifting attention away from internal stress toward external processing. This is why dogs instinctively increase sniffing behavior in unfamiliar or emotionally challenging situations. It is not avoidance, but self-regulation. Activities that allow extended sniffing, such as slow exploratory walks, often calm dogs more effectively than fast-paced exercise. Preventing sniffing by constantly pulling the leash or rushing movement removes one of a dog's most effective coping mechanisms. Over time, this can contribute to frustration and emotional instability. From an evolutionary perspective, sniffing allowed dogs to assess safety, territory, and social information efficiently. In modern life, it continues to serve the same regulatory function. For dogs, sniffing is not optional enrichment. It is essential emotional maintenance. Dogs also display a basic sensitivity to fairness within cooperative interactions. In controlled studies, dogs asked to perform tasks alongside another dog often disengage when rewards are distributed unequally. This reaction is not driven purely by hunger. Even when capable of completing the task, dogs may refuse to continue if they perceive persistent unfairness. This suggests an expectation of balance within cooperative relationships. From an evolutionary standpoint, this makes sense. Cooperation only remains stable when participants receive reasonably equal outcomes. Dogs evolved in social groups where repeated cooperation was essential for survival. Sensitivity to unfairness prevents exploitation and helps maintain trust. Interestingly, dogs respond more strongly to unfairness when interacting with familiar partners than with strangers, indicating that expectations are shaped by social bonds. While dogs do not possess abstract moral reasoning, they clearly recognize when interaction patterns violate established norms. Fair treatment matters to dogs because cooperation matters. When fairness is present, motivation and trust increase naturally. Dogs accumulate stress over time rather than experiencing it as isolated, self-contained events. This means that what appears to be a sudden overreaction is often the result of many small stressors stacking on top of one another. Everyday elements such as unpredictable schedules, lack of rest, emotional tension in the household, excessive stimulation, or repeated social pressure gradually raise a dog's baseline stress level. Neurologically, this accumulation keeps stress hormones elevated for longer periods, reducing the dog's ability to self-regulate. When the internal threshold is exceeded, even a minor trigger can produce an outsized reaction. This is why removing a single stressor often fails to resolve behavioral issues. The underlying load remains. Dogs under chronic stress frequently show decreased learning capacity, increased vigilance, digestive issues, and heightened reactivity. Recovery requires more than correction. It requires time, predictability, and opportunities for decompression. Calm routines, sufficient sleep, and low-pressure interactions gradually lower baseline stress. Dogs do not reset automatically. They unload stress slowly, and only when the environment consistently allows it. Silence from humans is not emotionally neutral to dogs. Dogs interpret silence as meaningful information, especially when it appears suddenly or in contexts where interaction is normally present. A quiet human is not perceived as doing nothing, but as someone whose emotional availability has changed. Dogs learn human communication patterns quickly. When speech, tone, or engagement disappears, the dog detects a break in expectation. This can lead to increased monitoring behavior, closer proximity, appeasement signals, or restlessness. Neurologically, dogs rely on continuous feedback to assess social safety. Silence removes data, forcing the dog to compensate by scanning posture, movement, and environment more intensely. This heightened vigilance increases cognitive load and can elevate stress levels. Importantly, this does not mean humans must constantly talk. Calm, predictable body language paired with stable routines provides sufficient clarity. It is emotional withdrawal, not quietness itself, that dogs react to. For dogs, communication never stops. The absence of signals is itself a signal. Learning speed in dogs is directly tied to emotional safety. Dogs do not learn efficiently when they feel pressured, confused, or threatened, regardless of intelligence or motivation. Stress shifts neural resources away from exploration and memory formation toward survival systems. In this state, attention narrows and flexibility disappears. When dogs feel safe, learning accelerates naturally. They experiment more, recover from mistakes faster, and generalize skills across contexts. This is why gentle, consistent training produces more reliable long-term results than force-based methods. Dogs trained under pressure may comply temporarily, but retention and adaptability suffer. Emotional safety creates a cognitive environment where curiosity replaces caution. Neurologically, this state supports dopamine-driven exploration rather than cortisol-driven defense. Learning thrives where mistakes are allowed without consequence. Dogs do not resist learning. They resist learning under emotional threat. Routine serves as emotional infrastructure for dogs rather than mere habit. Predictable sequences allow dogs to anticipate what will happen next, reducing uncertainty and conserving emotional energy. When routines are stable, dogs rest more deeply and recover more quickly from stimulation. Disrupted routines force constant vigilance, increasing baseline stress even in otherwise calm dogs. This is why dogs often struggle during schedule changes, travel, or household upheaval. The issue is not novelty itself, but loss of predictability. Neurologically, routine stabilizes expectation systems that regulate emotional arousal. Importantly, routine does not eliminate joy or flexibility. It provides a framework within which novelty feels safe. Dogs thrive when they know what is coming and when. Routine is not control. For dogs, it is reassurance. Dogs rely heavily on predictable transitions between activities to regulate their emotional state. It is not only what happens during an activity that matters, but how one state ends and another begins. In natural canine behavior, transitions are gradual and clearly signaled. Movement slows before rest, exploration tapers off before stillness, and social interaction softens before disengagement. In modern human environments, these natural transitions are often removed. Dogs are expected to switch instantly from excitement to calm, from social engagement to isolation, or from rest to alertness without intermediate cues. This abrupt shifting creates emotional friction. Neurologically, transitions allow the nervous system to recalibrate. When a transition is rushed or unclear, arousal remains elevated, making calm behavior difficult. This is why dogs often struggle after intense play or appear unsettled when left alone suddenly. Predictable rituals, pauses, and consistent cues act as emotional bridges that help dogs adjust smoothly. Transitions are not wasted time. They are essential regulation points that maintain emotional continuity. Dogs also attach strong emotional meaning to specific locations, not just to events or people. Places become emotionally charged through repeated experiences, forming what can be described as location-based emotional memory. A park associated with freedom and exploration may trigger excitement, while a street linked to fear or overwhelm may provoke anxiety even when nothing overtly threatening is present. Neurologically, spatial memory and emotional memory are closely connected. When a dog enters a familiar location, stored emotional information activates automatically, influencing behavior before conscious assessment occurs. This explains why dogs may behave differently in different rooms of the same house or react strongly to certain environments without an obvious cause. New environments lack emotional mapping, which can temporarily increase vigilance or uncertainty. Creating positive location associations requires repetition and calm exposure, not intensity. Over time, emotionally neutral or positive experiences reshape the dog's internal map. Dogs remember places by how they felt there, and those feelings guide behavior long after the original experience has passed. When social tension arises, dogs often manage it by redirecting attention rather than confronting the source directly. This redirection can appear as sudden interest in the ground, turning the head away, or focusing on an unrelated object. Far from being avoidance, this behavior is an intentional strategy to lower emotional intensity and prevent escalation. In canine social systems, attention redirection communicates non-threat and creates space for de-escalation. Other dogs frequently respond by reducing intensity in return. Humans often misinterpret this behavior as distraction or defiance, missing the underlying regulatory function. Neurologically, shifting attention interrupts stress feedback loops and allows emotional arousal to decrease. Preventing or punishing this behavior removes a valuable coping mechanism and can force dogs into more overt stress responses. Allowing attention redirection supports emotional self-regulation and social stability. Dogs disengage not to ignore, but to stabilize themselves and the situation. As relationships deepen, dogs refine their communication strategies with specific humans. Early interactions rely on broad, exaggerated signals to ensure understanding. Over time, as mutual patterns form, dogs begin to use subtler cues. A slight posture shift, a brief glance, or minimal movement may become sufficient to convey needs or emotions. With unfamiliar humans, dogs revert to clearer, more pronounced signals. This adaptability reflects learning rather than preference. Dogs adjust communication effort based on past success. If subtle signals are consistently recognized, escalation becomes unnecessary. When signals are ignored, dogs increase intensity. Relationship depth allows for quieter interaction, while inconsistency demands louder communication. This explains why dogs may appear calmer or better behaved with certain people. The difference lies in shared understanding, not in dominance or affection levels. Dogs do not change who they are. They change how they communicate based on relational feedback. Dogs are highly sensitive to inconsistency in human behavior, and they interpret it not as personality variation, but as environmental instability. When a human reacts differently to the same behavior across time, sometimes rewarding it, sometimes ignoring it, and sometimes correcting it, the dog struggles to build a reliable internal model of how the world works. This uncertainty forces the dog into a constant state of monitoring, where it must remain alert for subtle changes in tone, posture, or context. Neurologically, this keeps prediction systems active without resolution, increasing cognitive load and baseline stress. Over time, dogs in inconsistent environments may appear anxious, hesitant, or overly reactive, even in the absence of overt punishment. The issue is not confusion about rules, but the inability to trust patterns. Consistency does not mean strictness. Calm, predictable responses provide emotional safety by allowing the dog to anticipate outcomes. When predictability is restored, dogs relax visibly. They respond faster, make fewer mistakes, and show greater emotional resilience. Dogs are not testing boundaries for dominance. They are testing for reliability, because reliability determines safety. Dogs also manage their emotional state through repetition, a behavior often misunderstood as boredom or stubbornness. Repeating familiar actions, walking the same route, resting in the same spot, performing the same pre-sleep ritual, serves to reinforce predictability. Each repetition confirms that the environment remains stable, lowering uncertainty and conserving emotional energy. This is especially important during periods of change, such as moving homes, schedule disruptions, or emotional shifts within the household. Neurologically, repetition strengthens expectation pathways, reducing stress hormone release and promoting calm focus. Problems arise only when repetition becomes compulsive, which typically indicates unresolved stress rather than preference. Attempting to eliminate healthy repetitive behaviors can remove an important coping mechanism. For dogs, repetition is not stagnation. It is reassurance. Familiar patterns act as emotional anchors, helping dogs remain balanced in an unpredictable world. Dogs evaluate behaviors not only by their outcomes, but by the emotional experience associated with them. A behavior that leads to a reward but is paired with tension, confusion, or pressure may be avoided in the future, while a behavior that produces calm interaction or emotional relief is likely to be repeated even without tangible reinforcement. This emotional evaluation explains why dogs sometimes ignore commands they clearly understand. The issue is not comprehension, but emotional memory. Neurologically, experiences paired with emotional safety are encoded more strongly and retrieved more easily. This is why training methods that prioritize calm clarity outperform those that rely on pressure. Dogs are not motivated solely by results. They are motivated by how those results feel. Learning becomes reliable when emotional outcomes are positive and predictable. When learning feels safe, behavior stabilizes naturally. Dogs detect changes in routine with remarkable speed, often faster than humans consciously recognize them. Small shifts in timing, movement patterns, or emotional tone signal to the dog that something in the environment is changing. Because dogs rely on routine to predict what comes next, these deviations trigger increased attention and vigilance. This sensitivity explains why dogs may become restless, clingy, or unusually attentive before major life changes such as travel, illness, or stress. The dog is responding not to a specific event, but to pattern drift. Neurologically, dogs constantly compare current input to stored routines. When mismatches appear, alert systems activate. Maintaining transitional consistency during change helps dogs adapt smoothly. Dogs do not fear change itself. They react to losing predictability. When patterns remain partially intact, emotional stability is preserved. Dogs constantly adjust their level of independence based on how available and responsive humans are in their environment. This adjustment is not a matter of dominance or obedience, but an adaptive social strategy. When humans are consistently attentive, emotionally predictable, and responsive to signals, dogs tend to rely more on guidance. They check in more often, seek reassurance, and wait for cues before acting. In contrast, when humans are distant, distracted, or inconsistent, dogs begin to act more independently. They make decisions on their own, initiate actions without checking in, and may appear stubborn or self-directed. Neurologically, this reflects flexible social cognition rather than defiance. Dogs assess whether seeking human input is effective or necessary. If feedback is unreliable, self-reliance becomes safer. This explains why the same dog can behave very differently with different people. The behavior is not personality change, but learned strategy. Dogs adapt responsibility to maintain stability. They are not trying to control situations. They are compensating for perceived gaps in guidance. Cooperation emerges naturally when availability is clear and consistent. Dogs also use displacement behaviors as a primary method for coping with internal conflict. These behaviors include actions such as scratching, sniffing the ground, shaking the body, or suddenly grooming themselves in situations where none of these actions seem directly relevant. Displacement behaviors appear when a dog experiences competing motivations, such as wanting to approach while feeling uncertain. Rather than choosing one option immediately, the dog releases tension through a neutral action. Neurologically, this helps regulate arousal by redirecting nervous energy and preventing escalation. In canine social groups, displacement behaviors serve an important communicative function. They signal hesitation and non-aggression, giving all parties time to adjust. Other dogs often respond by reducing intensity. Humans frequently misinterpret displacement behaviors as distraction or disobedience, missing their regulatory role. Punishing these behaviors removes a vital coping tool. Recognizing them allows humans to reduce pressure and provide clarity. Dogs do not use displacement to avoid tasks. They use it to manage emotional overload. Dogs form strong cause and effect expectations about how their environment works, and these expectations shape behavior more powerfully than single rewards or corrections. When actions consistently lead to predictable outcomes, dogs build stable internal models that guide future decisions. This applies not only to training, but to daily life. Dogs learn that certain sounds predict events, that specific human movements precede interaction, and that emotional tone influences outcomes. When cause and effect relationships are inconsistent, dogs experience stress. Neurologically, prediction errors activate stress systems, increasing vigilance and reducing learning efficiency. This explains why inconsistent feedback slows progress and increases anxiety. Clear cause and effect patterns allow dogs to feel in control of their environment. Control reduces stress and increases confidence. Dogs are not guessing randomly. They are continuously testing and refining their understanding of how the world responds to their actions. Rhythmic movement plays a significant role in emotional regulation for dogs. Repetitive, predictable motion such as steady walking, gentle rocking during car rides, or even repetitive play patterns can lower arousal and promote calm focus. These movements stimulate neural rhythms associated with relaxation and continuity. After emotionally intense experiences, dogs often shake their bodies or walk in repetitive patterns. This is not random behavior, but a natural reset mechanism that helps release residual stress from the nervous system. Preventing these movements can trap tension internally, prolonging emotional recovery. From an evolutionary perspective, rhythmic movement was common during long-distance travel and group migration, contexts associated with safety and stability. In modern life, these same patterns retain their regulatory effect. Dogs do not move repetitively out of habit alone. Their movement often serves emotional restoration and balance. Dogs regulate emotional arousal by actively managing physical proximity to humans and other animals. Distance is not accidental or random, it is a deliberate tool used to increase or decrease stimulation. When a dog feels calm and secure, it may choose to lie nearby without contact. When stress rises, some dogs seek closer proximity for reassurance, while others increase distance to reduce sensory load. These preferences can shift moment by moment depending on context, relationship, and emotional state. Neurologically, proximity influences arousal through sensory inputs such as touch, smell, and movement. Closeness to a trusted human can lower stress by providing familiar cues, while excessive closeness during high arousal can amplify stimulation. Dogs continuously evaluate which option reduces emotional strain. Ignoring these signals, by forcing closeness or preventing distance, removes a key self-regulation mechanism and can escalate stress. Respecting proximity choices builds trust and stability. For dogs, space is not rejection or attachment alone, it is emotional management expressed physically. Dogs also experience anticipation as a powerful emotional state that shapes behavior long before an event occurs. They do not merely react to outcomes, they respond to signals that predict those outcomes. Picking up keys, changing shoes, or altering routine movements can trigger immediate emotional shifts because they signal what is coming next. Neurologically, anticipation is driven by dopamine systems associated with prediction rather than reward itself. This is why excitement or anxiety can build even if the event is delayed or never happens. When expected outcomes fail to occur repeatedly, dogs may show frustration, pacing, or disengagement. The issue is not denial, but violation of expectation. Predictable routines regulate anticipation and prevent emotional spikes. Unpredictable patterns destabilize it. Dogs live deeply in the present, but their present is shaped by what they expect next. Managing anticipation is central to emotional balance. Dogs form strong emotional associations with locations, creating internal maps that link place with feeling. A room where calm interactions occur becomes emotionally safe, while a location associated with overwhelm or fear can trigger stress even when nothing overtly negative is happening. These associations form through repetition, not intensity. Neurologically, spatial memory and emotional memory overlap, causing emotional responses to activate automatically when a familiar place is entered. This explains why dogs may behave differently in different environments without any obvious trigger. New spaces lack emotional mapping, increasing vigilance until associations form. Creating positive location associations requires calm exposure and consistency. Dogs remember places by how they felt there, and those feelings guide behavior long after details fade. Dogs frequently manage social tension by adjusting their own behavior before expecting change from others. This self-adjustment may include slowing movement, averting gaze, lowering posture, or disengaging briefly. These actions reduce intensity and signal non-threat. In canine social systems, this strategy prevents conflict efficiently. Other dogs often respond by mirroring reduced intensity. Humans frequently overlook these subtle signals, unintentionally escalating situations. When early self-adjustment fails, dogs may escalate communication. This progression reflects strategy, not aggression. Dogs prioritize stability and will attempt resolution quietly before resorting to stronger signals. Understanding and respecting these early adjustments prevents conflict and supports social harmony. Dogs do not experience learning as a purely mechanical process of commands and responses. Learning is deeply influenced by emotional context. When a dog feels emotionally secure, learning accelerates naturally. In such states, curiosity replaces caution, attention broadens, and mistakes are treated as information rather than threats. Neurologically, emotional safety allows the brain to allocate resources to exploration and memory formation instead of survival responses. This is why dogs in calm environments often learn faster, retain information longer, and generalize skills more effectively. In contrast, pressure, confusion, or fear shift brain activity toward defensive systems. Attention narrows, flexibility decreases, and learning slows dramatically. This difference explains why force-based or inconsistent training often produces short-term compliance but weak long-term reliability. The dog may perform correctly to avoid discomfort, not because the behavior is understood. Over time, this undermines confidence and adaptability. Learning thrives where emotional signals are clear, mistakes are safe, and outcomes are predictable. Dogs do not resist learning. They resist learning under emotional threat. Dogs rely on repetition to stabilize their internal models of the world. Repetition is often misread as stubbornness or lack of interest, but in reality it serves to confirm predictability. Repeating familiar routes, routines, or behaviors allows dogs to verify that expectations still hold. Each successful repetition reduces uncertainty and conserves emotional energy. This becomes especially important during periods of change, such as moving homes, altered schedules, or emotional tension in the household. Neurologically, repetition strengthens expectation pathways and reduces stress hormone release. Only when repetition becomes compulsive does it signal unresolved stress rather than preference. Attempts to eliminate healthy repetitive behaviors can remove a key coping mechanism. For dogs, repetition is not stagnation. It is reassurance through familiarity, a way to remain balanced in a complex and changing environment. Dogs evaluate behaviors based on emotional outcomes as much as practical results. A behavior that technically works but is paired with tension, confusion, or pressure may be avoided in the future. Conversely, behaviors associated with calm interaction, clarity, or emotional relief are reinforced even without tangible rewards. This emotional tagging system explains why dogs sometimes ignore commands they clearly understand. The issue is not comprehension, but memory of how the behavior felt. Neurologically, emotionally safe experiences are encoded more strongly and retrieved more easily. This is why training approaches that emphasize calm clarity produce more reliable behavior over time. Dogs are not motivated solely by success or failure. They are motivated by emotional consequences. When learning feels safe, behavior stabilizes naturally and persists across contexts. Dogs detect changes in human routine with remarkable sensitivity. Small deviations in timing, movement patterns, or emotional tone are often noticed before humans consciously register them. Because dogs rely heavily on routine to predict what comes next, these deviations signal potential environmental change. The dog responds by increasing attention and vigilance, reassessing expectations. This sensitivity explains why dogs may appear restless, clingy, or unusually attentive before major life events such as travel, illness, or stress. Neurologically, dogs continuously compare current input to stored patterns. When mismatches appear, alert systems activate. Maintaining partial routine consistency during change helps dogs adapt smoothly. Dogs do not fear change itself. They react to the loss of predictability. When patterns remain coherent, emotional stability is preserved. Dogs interpret fairness not only through tangible rewards, but also through social balance and consistency in interactions. When dogs cooperate with humans or other dogs, they form expectations about how effort and outcomes are distributed. If those expectations are repeatedly violated, motivation declines. This reaction is not driven by envy or abstract morality, but by the breakdown of cooperative stability. In studies where dogs perform tasks side by side, individuals often disengage when rewards are distributed unequally, even when they are capable of completing the task. The emotional response is strongest with familiar partners, indicating that expectations are shaped by relationship history. Neurologically, unfairness triggers prediction error signals that activate stress responses. The dog is not upset about the reward itself, but about the inconsistency of the system. Fairness creates trust, and trust reduces cognitive load. When cooperation feels balanced, dogs participate willingly and confidently. When it feels arbitrary, they withdraw. For dogs, fairness is not an ethical concept. It is a signal that cooperation is safe and sustainable. Dogs also manage emotional pressure through what can be described as cognitive pacing. They do not process all information at once, but in manageable segments. When environments become overstimulating, dogs slow down mentally by reducing engagement, disengaging attention, or focusing on simple, repetitive actions. This pacing allows the nervous system to prevent overload. Neurologically, overstimulation increases arousal and reduces processing efficiency. Cognitive pacing counteracts this by narrowing focus and lowering demand. Humans often misinterpret this as disinterest or stubbornness, but it is a protective strategy. Dogs that are allowed to pace their engagement recover faster and maintain emotional stability. Forcing constant interaction or stimulation removes this buffer and can lead to stress-related behaviors. Cognitive pacing is not avoidance. It is self-preservation in complex environments. Dogs build mental representations of environments that extend beyond simple landmarks. These representations integrate scent, sound, visual cues, and memory into coherent internal maps. Unlike humans, dogs rely heavily on scent layering, which provides temporal and social information unavailable through vision alone. A familiar route is remembered not just by appearance, but by the sequence of smells and their typical intensity. Neurologically, these maps support navigation, safety assessment, and emotional regulation. Disruption of familiar environments can temporarily destabilize behavior because internal maps no longer align with reality. This explains why dogs may appear unsettled after furniture rearrangement or relocation. Over time, new maps form through repeated exposure. Dogs are not disoriented because they lack intelligence, but because their internal representations require updating. Navigation for dogs is a multisensory, memory-driven process. Dogs also respond strongly to human emotional withdrawal, even when no negative behavior is present. Emotional withdrawal differs from calm silence. It involves reduced responsiveness, altered body language, and diminished engagement. Dogs detect these shifts quickly and often respond by increasing proximity, monitoring behavior, or offering appeasement signals. Neurologically, emotional withdrawal removes predictive cues that dogs rely on to assess safety. This increases vigilance and cognitive load. The dog is not reacting to punishment, but to uncertainty. Consistent emotional availability, even without verbal interaction, maintains stability. Dogs do not require constant attention, but they require predictable presence. For dogs, emotional absence is information, and that information influences behavior profoundly. Dogs regulate emotional arousal through controlled use of attention, not just through physical movement. Attention, for a dog, is an active resource that can either amplify or reduce stress. When a situation becomes emotionally intense, dogs often narrow their focus deliberately. They may fixate on a neutral object, stare into the distance, or lower their gaze. This narrowing of attention reduces incoming sensory information, giving the nervous system space to stabilize. Neurologically, focused attention suppresses competing stimuli and lowers overall arousal. This is why dogs may appear zoned out during stressful moments. It is not disengagement, but regulation. When allowed to manage attention freely, dogs recover more quickly from emotional spikes. Forcing eye contact or demanding interaction during these moments can increase stress. Attention control is a subtle but powerful coping mechanism that allows dogs to remain functional in complex environments. Dogs also experience emotional relief through predictable physical rituals. Actions such as circling before lying down, stretching after rest, or performing familiar pre-sleep behaviors are not random habits. These rituals signal safety and continuity. Neurologically, repeated physical sequences activate memory and expectation systems associated with calm states. The body learns that certain movements precede rest or relaxation. Interrupting these rituals can increase arousal and delay emotional settling. In natural settings, rituals evolved as reliable transitions between activity states. In modern environments, preserving these rituals helps dogs maintain emotional balance. Rituals are not quirks. They are embodied signals that the environment is stable and safe. Dogs respond to novelty not based on intensity, but on controllability. A new object or situation that the dog can approach, investigate, and retreat from at its own pace is often processed calmly. Novelty that is forced, sudden, or unavoidable triggers stress responses. Neurologically, control reduces threat perception by allowing prediction and adjustment. This explains why dogs may accept unfamiliar environments slowly but confidently when given choice, yet react strongly to sudden exposure. Allowing dogs to control proximity, duration, and pace of novelty builds resilience. Fear does not come from the unknown itself, but from lack of agency. When dogs can manage exposure, curiosity replaces anxiety. Dogs continuously update their social expectations based on microfeedback from humans. These updates happen moment by moment. Small reactions such as delayed responses, changes in tone, or altered posture provide information about emotional availability and predictability. Dogs integrate this feedback rapidly, adjusting behavior in real time. Neurologically, this relies on fast associative learning systems tuned to social cues. Over time, patterns of feedback form stable expectations. Consistent microfeedback builds confidence and calm behavior. Inconsistent feedback forces constant reassessment, increasing cognitive load. Dogs do not wait for major events to learn. They learn continuously from subtle signals. Stability is built from thousands of small, predictable interactions. Dogs experience fear primarily as a response to uncertainty rather than to objective danger. In natural environments, dogs evolved to handle physical threats, but unpredictability posed a greater risk because it prevented preparation. When a dog cannot anticipate what will happen next, the nervous system shifts into a heightened alert state. This is why sudden noises, erratic human behavior, or inconsistent rules often trigger fear responses even when no harm follows. Neurologically, rapid threat assessment systems prioritize speed over accuracy, producing defensive reactions that may appear excessive. Repeated exposure without control can worsen fear, because the dog's internal model never stabilizes. Gradual exposure paired with predictability allows the brain to recalibrate expectations and reduce fear over time. Calm, consistent environments lower baseline anxiety because they restore the dog's ability to forecast outcomes. Dogs do not fear the world itself, they fear not understanding it. Fear, in this sense, is a signal that the environment has become unreadable. Dogs also show a strong sensitivity to the fairness of human attention, not only to tangible rewards. Attention carries social value, and dogs track how it is distributed across interactions. In multi-dog or busy households, uneven or erratic attention can create stress even when food and resources are adequate. Behaviorally, dogs may interrupt interactions, reposition themselves physically, or increase signaling to restore perceived balance. This response is strongest when attention patterns change suddenly because expectations are violated. Neurologically, social imbalance activates prediction error responses similar to those seen with unequal rewards. Predictable routines mitigate stress, even if attention is not equal, because predictability restores coherence. For dogs, attention is not optional enrichment, it is a component of social stability. When attention feels reliable, dogs relax. When it feels arbitrary, vigilance increases. Dogs store memories as emotional summaries rather than detailed narratives. What persists is the feeling and the outcome, not the sequence of events. This allows rapid decision-making without cognitive overload. A place, sound, or person can trigger a strong reaction long after the specifics are forgotten, because the emotional tag remains active. Neurologically, this relies on structures that prioritize emotional relevance. The efficiency of this system explains both resilience and vulnerability. Single accidental negatives are often forgiven, but repeated negative emotional outcomes build lasting wariness. Conversely, consistent positive emotional experiences create deep trust that generalizes across contexts. This memory style means that changing behavior requires changing emotional patterns, not just events. Dogs live in the present, but their present is guided by emotional echoes of the past. Dogs do not perceive time abstractly, yet they anticipate events with remarkable accuracy by reading patterns. Light levels, household sounds, human routines, and even scent decay provide information about temporal progression. This pattern-based timing allows dogs to predict meals, walks, and returns without clocks. Disruptions to these patterns cause stress because the predictive model breaks down. The dog is not missing an event, it is losing coherence in expectation. Neurologically, anticipation engages prediction systems that shape emotion ahead of outcomes. Predictable schedules regulate anticipation and keep arousal stable, while erratic schedules amplify it. For dogs, understanding time means knowing what comes next. When next is clear, calm follows. Dogs do not process the world as a constant stream of isolated events. Instead, they rely on layered prediction systems that allow them to remain emotionally stable in complex environments. One of the most important layers of this system is the way dogs evaluate control. Control, for a dog, does not mean dominance or authority. It means the ability to influence distance, pace, duration, and intensity of interaction. When a dog feels it can choose whether to approach, retreat, pause, or continue, emotional arousal remains manageable. When choice is removed, stress escalates rapidly. This is why dogs often react more strongly to forced situations than to genuinely threatening ones. Neurologically, perceived control dampens threat responses by allowing prediction and adjustment. Situations that are objectively mild can feel overwhelming if the dog cannot regulate exposure. Allowing control restores agency, which in turn restores calm. Dogs are not seeking power. They are seeking predictability through choice. Closely related to this is the way dogs experience novelty. Novelty itself is not inherently stressful. What determines emotional response is whether novelty can be explored incrementally. When a dog can investigate a new stimulus at its own pace, retreat when needed, and reapproach voluntarily, curiosity dominates over fear. Forced novelty, by contrast, overwhelms prediction systems. Neurologically, forced exposure prevents the brain from building gradual expectation models, keeping stress systems active. This explains why some dogs adapt easily to new environments when given freedom, yet react intensely when exposure is sudden or unavoidable. Controlled novelty builds resilience over time. Each successful self-managed exposure expands the dog's tolerance range. Dogs do not fear the unknown. They fear the unknown that cannot be negotiated. Dogs also regulate emotional intensity through deliberate modulation of eye contact. Eye contact is not neutral in canine communication. Sustained, direct staring increases arousal and can signal pressure, while brief, soft glances communicate reassurance and non-threat. Dogs actively manage gaze depending on emotional context. In stressful situations, they may avert their eyes to reduce stimulation. In affiliative moments, they may seek brief eye contact to reinforce connection. Neurologically, gaze influences arousal pathways tied to social evaluation. Forcing eye contact during stress increases cognitive load and emotional pressure. Allowing dogs to control gaze direction supports self-regulation. Eye contact for dogs is not about attention alone. It is about managing emotional bandwidth. Another crucial but often overlooked mechanism is how dogs use predictable microroutines to anchor emotional stability throughout the day. These are not large schedules like feeding times, but small repeated sequences: how a leash is picked up, how a door is opened, how a person moves before sitting. Each repeated microroutine confirms that the world is functioning normally. Neurologically, these confirmations reduce the need for vigilance. When microroutines disappear or become erratic, dogs compensate by increasing monitoring behavior. This raises baseline stress without any obvious trigger. Stability is built not only from big routines, but from thousands of small, reliable patterns. Dogs live inside these patterns. When they hold, calm emerges naturally. Dogs also respond strongly to emotional spillover within human environments. Emotional spillover refers to tension, urgency, or frustration that is not directed at the dog but exists in the space. Dogs detect this through posture, movement efficiency, breathing rhythm, and scent changes. Neurologically, these cues activate alert systems even without direct interaction. Over time, constant exposure to emotional spillover increases baseline arousal, reducing resilience. Dogs may appear restless, reactive, or withdrawn without any obvious cause. The issue is not mistreatment, but chronic emotional noise. Calm presence, slow movement, and emotional neutrality act as environmental regulators. Dogs do not need perfect humans. They need emotionally readable ones. Finally, dogs maintain social harmony by adjusting themselves before expecting adjustment from others. This principle appears repeatedly across canine behavior. When tension arises, dogs first reduce their own intensity. They slow down, lower posture, disengage briefly, or redirect attention. These behaviors are not submission. They are strategic de-escalation. Only when self-adjustment fails do dogs escalate communication. This progression reflects social intelligence refined through evolution. Dogs prefer stability over confrontation. Understanding and respecting early self-regulation signals prevents escalation and preserves trust. Dogs do not want conflict. They want coherence. Dogs regulate their internal state not only through obvious behaviors, but through subtle management of sensory load. Sensory input for dogs is constant and intense. Sounds, smells, movement, proximity, and social signals arrive simultaneously. To remain emotionally stable, dogs actively filter this input. When stimulation rises, they reduce intake by turning the head away, lowering the body, slowing movement, or choosing environments with fewer competing cues. This filtering is not avoidance. It is a deliberate strategy to keep arousal within manageable limits. Neurologically, reducing sensory input lowers activation in stress-related systems and allows regulatory circuits to reassert control. When dogs are prevented from filtering through constant interaction, forced proximity, or overstimulating environments, baseline stress rises even if no single trigger is extreme. Over time, this leads to irritability, reduced learning capacity, and emotional exhaustion. Providing low stimulation zones, allowing disengagement, and respecting withdrawal signals preserves emotional balance. Dogs do not need constant engagement. They need control over how much of the world enters their nervous system. Closely connected to sensory regulation is the way dogs manage choice density throughout the day. Choice density refers to how many decisions a dog is required to make in a given period. In stable environments, most decisions are already resolved by routine. The dog knows where to rest, when to move, and how interactions typically unfold. When choice density increases, through inconsistent rules, unclear expectations, or excessive freedom without structure, mental load increases sharply. Neurologically, decision-making consumes cognitive resources and elevates stress when outcomes are uncertain. Dogs experiencing high choice density may appear hesitant, slow to respond, or disengaged. This is often mislabeled as stubbornness. In reality, the dog is conserving resources. Reducing unnecessary choices through clear structure restores confidence and fluid behavior. Choice is beneficial only when framed by predictability. For dogs, fewer clear options feel safer than many ambiguous ones. Dogs also use predictable physical rituals to signal transitions and stabilize emotional state. These rituals include circling before lying down, stretching upon waking, shaking the body after stimulation, or performing consistent pre-rest behaviors. Such actions are not meaningless habits. They are embodied cues that tell the nervous system what state is coming next. Neurologically, repeated motor sequences activate memory networks associated with calm or readiness, preparing the body in advance. Interrupting these rituals, by rushing movement or forcing transitions, can leave arousal unresolved. This is why dogs may appear restless even after activity has ended. Allowing rituals to complete gives the nervous system closure. In natural contexts, rituals evolved to mark safe transitions between activity states. In modern life, respecting them supports emotional regulation and faster recovery from stimulation. Rituals are not quirks. They are biological punctuation marks. Another powerful regulator of canine emotion is tempo matching within social interactions. Dogs constantly adjust their movement speed, posture, and responsiveness to match the tempo of those around them. Fast, abrupt human movement increases arousal, while slow, deliberate motion lowers it. Dogs mirror tempo not as imitation, but as synchronization. Neurologically, synchronized movement reduces uncertainty by aligning prediction systems. This is why calm, slow humans often produce calm dogs without verbal instruction. When tempo mismatches occur, such as demanding stillness while moving erratically, dogs struggle to regulate. The nervous system receives conflicting signals. Conscious tempo control by humans acts as an environmental stabilizer. Slower movement, smoother transitions, and consistent pacing create emotional clarity. Dogs do not require commands to calm down. They require a tempo they can synchronize with. Dogs also respond strongly to emotional predictability rather than emotional positivity alone. A consistently neutral human is often less stressful than an emotionally expressive but unpredictable one. This is because predictability allows accurate forecasting. Neurologically, predictable emotional patterns reduce activation of alert systems. Dogs living with emotionally volatile humans may remain in a state of readiness, even if no direct threat exists. Over time, this readiness becomes baseline anxiety. Predictable emotional presence, even quiet, even reserved, restores coherence. Dogs do not need constant affection. They need emotional signals that make sense. Finally, dogs maintain long-term emotional stability by continuously updating internal models through small confirmations. Each ordinary interaction, how a door opens, how a voice sounds, how a hand moves, either confirms or destabilizes expectations. Stability emerges from thousands of confirmations, not from dramatic moments. When confirmations accumulate, dogs relax deeply. When they fail, vigilance replaces calm. This is why environments feel safe or unsafe without obvious reasons. Dogs are reading patterns humans rarely notice. Coherence is built quietly, and so is trust. Dogs regulate emotional stability through a continuous assessment of environmental predictability, not just through direct interaction. Even when nothing is happening, dogs are constantly scanning for signals that confirm whether the environment is functioning as expected. Familiar sounds, recurring light patterns, consistent movement routes, and repeated daily sequences all serve as confirmation points. When these signals remain stable, the dog's nervous system downshifts into a low arousal state. When several of these signals disappear or change simultaneously, vigilance increases even if no direct stressor is present. Neurologically, predictability reduces the need for constant threat assessment. This explains why dogs often appear unsettled during renovations, travel, or household schedule changes despite receiving normal care. The stress comes not from discomfort, but from broken environmental logic. Restoring predictability through small constants, unchanged walking routes, familiar resting spots, consistent handling rituals, helps re-establish emotional grounding. Dogs do not require control over everything. They require enough stable reference points to trust that the environment is coherent. Dogs also use energy conservation strategies as a form of emotional regulation. Unlike humans, dogs do not push through emotional fatigue by willpower. When emotional or cognitive load becomes high, dogs instinctively reduce output. They may slow movement, disengage socially, or rest more frequently. This behavior is often misinterpreted as laziness or lack of motivation, but it is a biological safeguard. Neurologically, prolonged arousal consumes metabolic resources and destabilizes emotional regulation systems. Energy conservation allows recovery before overload occurs. Dogs that are repeatedly prevented from disengaging, through constant stimulation, demands, or forced activity, accumulate stress more rapidly. Over time, this can manifest as irritability or shutdown behavior. Allowing rest, quiet observation, and low-demand periods preserves emotional resilience. Dogs are not avoiding effort. They are protecting regulatory capacity. Another deeply embedded mechanism in canine behavior is pattern completion. Dogs are not only sensitive to routines, but to the completion of expected sequences. When a familiar sequence begins but does not finish, emotional tension increases. For example, picking up a leash but not going for a walk, initiating play but stopping abruptly, or signaling rest but not allowing it to complete can leave arousal unresolved. Neurologically, incomplete patterns maintain prediction systems in an active state, preventing emotional closure. This explains why dogs may pace, whine, or remain alert after interrupted activities. Allowing patterns to complete, even in simplified form, provides resolution. If a walk cannot happen, a brief alternative ritual helps close the loop. Dogs do not demand specific outcomes. They need endings that make sense. Pattern completion is emotional punctuation. Dogs also adjust their emotional responses based on historical success of communication strategies. Over time, each dog builds an internal ranking of which signals are effective. Subtle body language may be tried first. If ignored, stronger signals follow. This escalation is not defiance or manipulation. It is adaptive learning. Neurologically, behaviors that produce results are reinforced, while those that fail are deprioritized. When humans consistently respond to early, quiet signals, dogs remain calm communicators. When early signals are ignored, dogs learn that escalation is necessary. This is why some dogs appear dramatic or reactive. Their communication history shaped that outcome. Resetting communication requires consistent response to low-intensity signals. Dogs do not want to shout. They shout when whispering does not work. Dogs further regulate emotional load through spatial predictability within familiar environments. It is not only the location itself, but how space is typically used that matters. Where people sit, where movement usually occurs, where rest is expected, all of these patterns inform emotional expectations. Sudden changes in spatial use, such as blocking access to a usual resting area or altering traffic flow within a home, can increase stress even without direct interaction. Neurologically, spatial predictability supports orientation and reduces cognitive effort. Dogs that know where calm happens can self-regulate more effectively. Maintaining consistent spatial rules helps dogs recover faster from stimulation. Finally, dogs maintain long-term emotional balance through microconfirmations of safety. These are not dramatic events, but tiny, repeated signals that confirm nothing has changed. A familiar tone of voice, a predictable movement before sitting, a consistent pause before leaving a room. Each confirmation reinforces the internal model that the world is stable. When confirmations disappear, vigilance replaces calm. Emotional stability is built quietly, moment by moment. Dogs live inside these confirmations. When they are present, behavior flows smoothly. When they are absent, tension accumulates without obvious cause. Dogs maintain emotional balance through an ongoing process of anticipatory adjustment, rather than reacting only after something happens. Long before a situation fully unfolds, dogs begin preparing emotionally based on early signals. A slight change in human posture, altered walking speed, or a shift in daily rhythm can trigger subtle internal adjustments. Neurologically, this anticipatory processing allows the dog to minimize shock and reduce sudden spikes in arousal. When anticipation is accurate, emotional responses remain smooth and proportional. When anticipation is repeatedly disrupted, the nervous system shifts into a more defensive mode, increasing vigilance and reactivity. This explains why dogs in unpredictable environments often appear tense even when nothing overtly stressful is occurring. Their anticipation systems are constantly recalibrating. Supporting stable anticipation requires consistency in early cues, not just in final outcomes. Dogs feel safest when they can sense what is coming next well in advance. Anticipation is not anxiety by default. It becomes anxiety only when prediction repeatedly fails. Dogs also rely heavily on contextual memory to guide behavior. Rather than remembering isolated actions, they remember situations as integrated wholes. A behavior learned in one emotional and environmental context may not automatically transfer to another, even if the physical command is the same. This is why dogs may perform reliably at home but struggle in new locations. Neurologically, contextual memory binds emotion, sensory input, and action into a single representation. When context changes significantly, the memory does not fully activate. This is not stubbornness or confusion. It is a feature of how canine memory optimizes for emotional safety. Generalization requires repeated exposure across contexts, each with calm and predictable outcomes. Dogs learn best when new contexts are introduced gradually, allowing memory networks to expand rather than fracture. Context matters more than repetition alone. Another foundational aspect of canine emotional regulation is threshold management. Dogs operate within emotional thresholds that define how much stimulation they can process before losing regulation. These thresholds are not fixed. They fluctuate based on rest, stress load, environment, and recent experiences. A dog that appears tolerant one day may react strongly the next, not because of mood, but because the threshold has shifted. Neurologically, threshold crossing activates stress systems that override learned behavior. Expecting consistent performance regardless of threshold state leads to frustration on both sides. Effective management involves recognizing early signs of rising arousal and reducing input before the threshold is crossed. This might mean increasing distance, slowing movement, or ending interaction early. Dogs that are supported below threshold learn more efficiently and recover faster. Emotional regulation is not about suppression. It is about staying within capacity. Dogs also regulate social interaction through temporal spacing, the timing between engagements. Continuous interaction without pauses increases emotional load, even when interaction is positive. Dogs benefit from cycles of engagement followed by disengagement, allowing arousal to rise and fall naturally. Neurologically, pauses allow stress hormones to dissipate and prediction systems to reset. Without pauses, arousal accumulates until regulation fails. This is why dogs may become irritable or overexcited during prolonged social activity. Incorporating natural breaks preserves emotional balance. Dogs do not disengage because they are done socially. They disengage because their system requires recovery time. Respecting temporal spacing leads to longer-lasting calm and better social behavior. Dogs further rely on environmental redundancy to feel secure. Redundancy refers to having multiple signals that convey the same information. For example, a calm tone, slow movement, and familiar posture all indicate safety. When one signal is ambiguous, others compensate. Environments with high redundancy are emotionally easy to process. Environments with conflicting signals, calm words paired with tense movement, or familiar routines paired with emotional volatility, reduce redundancy and increase uncertainty. Neurologically, redundancy lowers cognitive load by reducing reliance on any single cue. Dogs raised in redundant environments develop stronger emotional resilience. They are less reactive because safety is confirmed through multiple channels simultaneously. Finally, dogs sustain long-term emotional health through predictable recovery opportunities. Recovery is not optional downtime, it is an active biological process. After stimulation, dogs require conditions that reliably lead back to calm. Familiar resting spots, low sensory input, and absence of social demand allow the nervous system to reset. Without predictable recovery, arousal accumulates across the day. Dogs that lack recovery opportunities may appear restless, clingy, or irritable even in calm settings. Recovery completes the emotional cycle. Dogs do not recover accidentally. They recover when the environment consistently allows it. Dogs regulate emotional safety through the way they interpret predictability of outcomes, not just predictability of actions. Two situations may look identical on the surface, but if the emotional outcome has differed in the past, the dog will respond differently. For example, being called may sometimes lead to calm interaction and other times to restraint or overstimulation. Even if the command is the same, the expected emotional result is not. Neurologically, dogs prioritize outcome prediction over action recognition. When outcomes are emotionally consistent, anticipation stabilizes and stress remains low. When outcomes vary, vigilance increases. This explains why dogs may hesitate in situations that appear familiar. They are not confused by the action, but uncertain about how it will end. Emotional consistency in outcomes builds trust far more effectively than repetition of commands. Dogs relax when they know not only what will happen, but how it will feel. Dogs also maintain emotional balance through self-directed disengagement, a behavior often misunderstood as ignoring or avoidance. Disengagement can include lying down away from activity, turning the head, reducing responsiveness, or focusing on a neutral stimulus. This is not defiance. It is a conscious regulation strategy. Neurologically, disengagement reduces sensory inflow and dampens arousal systems. In environments where dogs are allowed to disengage freely, emotional resilience increases. When disengagement is blocked, through constant stimulation, demands for attention, or forced interaction, stress accumulates silently. Over time, blocked disengagement leads to reactivity or shutdown. Dogs disengage to protect regulation capacity. Respecting disengagement prevents escalation and preserves long-term emotional health. Dogs experience social bonds not as static attachments, but as dynamic feedback systems. Every interaction updates the bond slightly, strengthening or weakening trust depending on predictability and emotional tone. A bond does not remain stable automatically. It requires ongoing confirmation. Neurologically, attachment systems respond to patterns, not isolated moments. This is why long periods of emotional unpredictability can erode trust even without negative events. Conversely, consistent neutral or calm interaction can rebuild stability over time. Dogs do not require constant affection to feel bonded. They require emotional coherence. Bonds feel safe when feedback remains consistent. When feedback becomes erratic, dogs compensate by increasing monitoring or reducing engagement. Relationships are maintained quietly, moment by moment. Dogs also rely on environmental gradients rather than binary states. For dogs, environments are not simply safe or unsafe, calm or exciting. They exist along gradients of intensity. Dogs constantly position themselves at points along these gradients that feel manageable. They move closer to stimulation when arousal is low and retreat when arousal rises. Neurologically, this gradient navigation allows fine-tuned regulation without abrupt shifts. Problems arise when gradients are removed, when dogs are forced into either full engagement or full isolation. Allowing gradient movement restores agency. Dogs regulate best when they can slide along intensity scales rather than being pushed to extremes. Dogs further regulate emotional stability through body orientation, not just distance. The angle of the body, direction of movement, and orientation of shoulders convey intent and emotional state. Turning the body slightly away reduces pressure, while facing directly increases intensity. Dogs use orientation continuously to adjust interaction levels. Neurologically, body orientation alters threat perception and arousal. Humans often overlook this signal, interpreting only distance or contact. Respecting orientation cues allows smoother interaction and prevents escalation. Dogs communicate comfort and discomfort through how they position their bodies, not only through overt actions. Finally, dogs sustain long-term emotional health through predictable closure of interactions. Closure refers to how interactions end. Abrupt endings without transition leave arousal unresolved. Calm closures, slowing movement, softening voice, predictable disengagement, allow emotional systems to settle. Neurologically, closure completes prediction cycles, allowing the nervous system to stand down. Without closure, arousal carries forward into the next activity. Over time, lack of closure contributes to chronic tension. Dogs do not require long interactions. They require interactions that end in a way that makes sense. Closure creates emotional completeness. Dogs regulate their emotional stability through control over interaction timing, not just interaction content. It is not only what happens during interaction that matters, but when it happens and how long it lasts. Dogs continuously evaluate whether interaction arrives too early, too late, or lasts longer than their nervous system can comfortably process. When timing aligns with internal readiness, interaction feels safe and rewarding. When timing is mismatched, even positive interaction can become overwhelming. Neurologically, timing affects arousal curves. Well-timed interaction allows arousal to rise and fall naturally, while poorly timed interaction stacks stimulation without recovery. This explains why dogs may resist affection at certain moments but seek it intensely at others. The behavior reflects internal timing, not relationship quality. Dogs thrive when they can initiate or end interaction in alignment with their regulatory needs. Respecting timing creates trust and emotional balance. Dogs also maintain regulation through predictable effort, rest cycles. In natural conditions, activity is followed by rest in reliable patterns. Effort without rest destabilizes emotional systems, even if effort is enjoyable. Neurologically, recovery periods allow stress hormones to clear and prediction systems to reset. Dogs deprived of predictable rest may appear hyperactive or inattentive, but the root issue is insufficient recovery. Rest is not inactivity. It is an active biological process. Dogs that are allowed to complete effort, rest cycles show better focus, calmer behavior, and greater resilience. Interrupting rest repeatedly prevents emotional settling and increases baseline arousal. Dogs do not resist rest. They require conditions that allow it to happen naturally. Another critical regulator of canine emotion is signal consistency across sensory channels. Dogs do not rely on a single cue to interpret a situation. They integrate voice tone, movement speed, posture, facial expression, and scent simultaneously. When these channels convey the same message, processing is easy and calm follows. When channels conflict, Calm words paired with tense posture, or affectionate tone paired with abrupt movement, cognitive load increases sharply. Neurologically, conflicting signals force constant reevaluation, keeping alert systems active. This explains why dogs sometimes react anxiously even when humans believe they are being calm. Emotional clarity depends on alignment across channels. Dogs are not sensitive to intention alone. They respond to coherence. When signals match, regulation stabilizes. Dogs also rely on micropredictability in handling, the small repeated ways humans touch, guide, or move them. How a collar is grasped, how a leash is attached, how a hand approaches. All of these details form predictable patterns. Neurologically, micropredictability reduces startle responses and supports trust. Inconsistent handling increases vigilance even if no pain occurs. This is why dogs may tense before routine actions when handling patterns vary. Consistent handling creates emotional safety without effort. Dogs relax when they know exactly how contact will feel. Trust is built through repetition at the smallest scale. Dogs further regulate emotional load by selective social engagement. They do not seek interaction constantly, but choose moments when engagement supports regulation. Social interaction is stimulating by nature. Dogs monitor their own arousal and disengage when stimulation exceeds comfort. Neurologically, disengagement allows stress systems to downshift. Preventing disengagement, by insisting on constant attention or interaction, leads to overload. Healthy social behavior includes approach and withdrawal. Dogs that are allowed both develop stronger emotional resilience and clearer communication. Engagement feels safe when exit is available. Finally, dogs maintain long-term emotional coherence through environmental continuity, the sense that spaces and interactions follow understandable rules over time. Continuity is not rigidity. It is consistency with flexibility. Dogs adapt easily when change follows recognizable patterns. They struggle when change is abrupt and unexplained. Neurologically, continuity allows gradual updating of internal models rather than forced replacement. This reduces stress and preserves learning. Dogs do not require static environments. They require environments that evolve in ways they can track. When continuity exists, adaptation is smooth and behavior remains stable. Over long periods of coexistence with humans, a distinct sensitivity to environmental coherence has emerged. Emotional stability is maintained not through constant interaction, but through the ability to confirm that the surrounding world behaves according to expectation. Familiar sounds occurring at familiar times, predictable movement paths within a home, and repeated daily sequences all function as confirmation signals. When these signals align, the nervous system downshifts naturally. When several confirmations disappear at once, vigilance increases even if nothing overtly negative is happening. This explains why changes such as travel, renovation, or schedule disruption often produce unease despite adequate care. The stress does not come from discomfort, but from broken logic. Reintroducing small constants restores coherence. A familiar walking route, an unchanged resting place, or a repeated handling ritual can anchor emotional regulation. Stability, in this sense, is not rigidity. It is the presence of enough reference points to make the environment readable again. Within daily life, emotional regulation also depends heavily on how effort and recovery are balanced. Biological systems are not designed for sustained activation without rest, even when the activity is positive. After physical or social effort, predictable recovery allows stress hormones to clear and regulatory systems to reset. When recovery is delayed or repeatedly interrupted, arousal accumulates silently. This accumulation often manifests as restlessness, irritability, or reduced focus rather than obvious exhaustion. The behavior is frequently misinterpreted as excess energy, when the real issue is insufficient recovery. Rest is not the absence of activity. It is an active physiological process that restores emotional bandwidth. Environments that allow uninterrupted rest cycles produce calmer, more resilient behavior. Those that do not gradually erode regulation capacity. Emotional balance depends as much on how activity ends as on how it begins. Another mechanism shaping long-term stability involves the completion of expected patterns. Sequences that begin but do not resolve leave internal systems in a suspended state. Picking up a leash without leaving, initiating interaction without closure, or signaling rest without allowing it to occur all maintain prediction systems in an active mode. Without resolution, arousal does not dissipate. Instead, it carries forward into the next situation. Over time, this creates chronic tension without a clear source. Allowing patterns to complete, even in abbreviated form, provides closure. If an expected event cannot happen, a consistent alternative helps resolve anticipation. Emotional systems require endings that make sense. Completion is not about outcome. It is about coherence. In social contexts, communication history plays a decisive role in how signals are expressed. Every interaction updates an internal ranking of which behaviors produce results. Subtle signals are typically offered first. If they are acknowledged, escalation is unnecessary. If they are ignored, stronger signals follow. This progression is often misread as manipulation or disobedience, when it is simply adaptive learning. Behaviors that work are reinforced, those that do not fade. Over time, communication style reflects the environment's responsiveness. Consistently responding to early, low-intensity signals produces calm communicators. Ignoring them teaches escalation. Resetting this pattern requires patience and consistency, not suppression. Communication stabilizes when early signals are effective again. Across longer timescales, emotional health is also shaped by the ability to modulate sensory input. Sound, movement, proximity, and social cues arrive continuously. Regulation depends on filtering. Turning away, slowing movement, choosing quieter spaces, or disengaging attention are all strategies that reduce sensory load. Preventing these strategies, through constant engagement or forced proximity, removes a primary regulatory tool. Over time, baseline stress rises even in neutral environments. Allowing sensory filtering preserves balance. Engagement becomes more sustainable when disengagement is permitted. Another subtle but powerful regulator is the alignment of tempo. Movement speed, gesture rhythm, and transition pacing all influence arousal. Slow, predictable tempo lowers stimulation and supports synchronization. Abrupt or erratic tempo increases cognitive load. Calm behavior often emerges without instruction when tempo becomes readable. Regulation follows rhythm more readily than command. Finally, long-term stability depends on thousands of small confirmations rather than dramatic events. A familiar tone, a predictable pause, a consistent way of entering or leaving a room, each confirmation reinforces the internal model that the world still makes sense. When confirmations accumulate, vigilance fades. When they disappear, tension grows without obvious cause. Emotional safety is built quietly, moment by moment, through coherence. Across long stretches of daily life, emotional stability depends on the ability to exit stimulation without penalty. Regulation is not only about engaging appropriately, but about being able to disengage safely. When withdrawal is respected, stepping away from interaction, choosing distance, or reducing responsiveness, the nervous system downshifts naturally. When disengagement is blocked or punished, arousal remains elevated and accumulates. This creates a paradox where even positive interaction becomes exhausting. Over time, blocked disengagement leads to either hyperreactivity or emotional shutdown. Healthy regulation requires the option to pause. Exit availability transforms interaction from obligation into choice, and choice restores calm. Emotional balance thrives where stepping back is allowed. Another foundational mechanism shaping behavior is expectation compression. Over repeated experiences, complex situations are simplified into emotional shortcuts. Instead of evaluating every detail, internal systems rely on compressed summaries: safe, uncertain, overwhelming, calming. These summaries allow rapid response without cognitive overload. However, when compressed expectations are inaccurate, because outcomes vary unpredictably, tension emerges. The system cannot rely on shortcuts and must analyze continuously. This sustained analysis increases stress even in low-demand environments. Rebuilding accurate compression requires repeated, emotionally consistent outcomes. Once compression stabilizes, responses become smooth again. Behavior improves not through effort, but through restored trust in prediction. Long-term emotional health is also influenced by social energy budgeting. Interaction consumes energy even when pleasant. Without awareness of limits, social engagement can exceed capacity. Signs of depletion often appear subtle at first: slower responses, increased distance, reduced eye contact. Ignoring these signs pushes the system beyond tolerance. Recovery then takes longer and becomes less complete. Allowing social engagement to end before depletion preserves resilience. Emotional stamina grows when limits are honored rather than tested. Sustainable interaction depends on respecting internal budgets, not maximizing exposure. A final but critical factor involves coherence between intention and execution. Calm words paired with hurried movement, or affectionate tone paired with tense posture, create mixed signals that increase cognitive load. Processing conflicting cues requires constant reassessment, preventing regulation from settling. Coherent signaling, where tone, movement, timing, and proximity align, reduces effort dramatically. Calm emerges not because of reassurance, but because interpretation becomes easy. Emotional systems relax when messages agree. Coherence is felt before it is understood. Over longer timescales, adaptation relies on gradual model updating rather than abrupt replacement. Internal representations of the world are revised incrementally. When change respects this pace, adaptation is smooth. When change is sudden and total, stress spikes. This applies to environments, routines, and relationships. Transitional bridges, partial continuity, familiar elements, predictable anchors allow models to update without collapse. Stability during change is maintained by carrying something familiar forward. Adaptation fails not because of change itself, but because of change without continuity. Emotional regulation is further supported by predictable endings. Interactions that conclude with clarity, slowing down, softening signals, allowing closure, permit arousal to dissipate. Abrupt endings leave systems unresolved, carrying activation into the next context. Over time, unresolved endings compound into chronic tension. Endings matter as much as beginnings. Closure completes emotional loops and restores baseline calm. Finally, long-term balance emerges from environmental legibility. Spaces, routines, and interactions that can be easily read require less monitoring. When legibility is high, vigilance drops. When legibility erodes, even familiar settings feel demanding. Legibility is created through repetition, coherence, and gentle pacing. Emotional safety is not enforced. It is inferred quietly from how understandable the world feels. Within stable living systems, emotional regulation is supported by the ability to predict recovery, not just stimulation. Arousal is inevitable. Recovery is optional only if the environment allows it. When recovery is reliable, quiet spaces, familiar resting spots, low sensory input, the nervous system learns that activation has an endpoint. This knowledge alone reduces peak intensity during stimulation. When recovery is uncertain or repeatedly interrupted, arousal is tempered less effectively because the system cannot trust that calm will follow. Over time, this uncertainty raises baseline vigilance. Recovery is not merely rest, it is the predictable return to safety. Emotional systems stabilize when recovery is expected, not when it is improvised. Another stabilizing mechanism involves signal economy, the minimization of unnecessary cues. Environments overloaded with instructions, gestures, corrections, and competing signals increase cognitive demand. Even when signals are benign, volume alone taxes processing capacity. Regulation improves when signals are sparse, consistent, and meaningful. Fewer cues that reliably indicate what matters reduce the need for constant interpretation. Over-signaling creates noise, clarity creates calm. This is why quiet handlers often produce steadier behavior than expressive ones. Emotional systems respond not to intensity, but to efficiency. Signal economy lowers mental effort and preserves bandwidth for adaptation. Long-term resilience also depends on trust in thresholds, the confidence that boundaries will be respected before overload occurs. When early signs of rising arousal consistently lead to de-escalation, internal systems learn that escalation is unnecessary. This trust lowers reactivity at baseline. When early signs are ignored, systems learn that only strong responses work. Threshold trust is built through repeated experiences of timely relief. It is lost through repeated overruns. Regulation improves when boundaries are honored early, not when they are tested. Calm behavior emerges from confidence that limits are seen. Another factor shaping stability is temporal coherence, the alignment of events over time. When activities, interactions, and transitions follow a sensible temporal order, processing becomes easier. When timing feels chaotic, events starting and stopping unpredictably, systems remain on alert. Temporal coherence does not require strict schedules. It requires understandable sequencing. Preparation, engagement, and closure need to follow one another in ways that make sense. When sequencing is readable, anticipation stabilizes. When it is not, vigilance persists. Time that makes sense feels safe. Emotional balance is further maintained through permission to pause. Pausing allows assessment without commitment. It provides space to recalibrate arousal before choosing engagement or withdrawal. Environments that value immediacy over assessment remove this pause and force premature decisions. Over time, forced immediacy increases stress and reduces judgment quality. Allowing pauses supports better choices and calmer participation. Pauses are not delays, they are regulation checkpoints. Another subtle but powerful stabilizer is consistency of micro-consequences. Small actions followed by predictable, proportionate responses build confidence. When micro-consequences vary wildly, systems cannot calibrate. Overreaction to minor actions or underreaction to significant ones destabilizes expectation. Proportionality matters. Emotional systems seek scale consistency. When scale is reliable, learning is smooth. When scale fluctuates, uncertainty grows. Across changing conditions, continuity markers anchor regulation. A continuity marker can be a familiar object, routine fragment, or interaction pattern that persists despite broader change. These markers act as bridges during transitions, allowing internal models to update incrementally. Without markers, change feels total and destabilizing. With them, adaptation is gradual. Continuity markers are not resistance to change, they are tools for navigating it. Emotional systems also rely on cooperative pacing within social exchanges. Matching speed, intensity, and rhythm reduces processing cost. Mismatched pacing, fast demands paired with slow contexts, or slow cues in urgent moments, creates friction. Cooperative pacing aligns expectations and reduces recalculation. Calm often emerges when pacing aligns, even without explicit calming efforts. Another contributor to long-term balance is predictable access to agency. Agency here means the reliable ability to influence outcomes at small scales, choosing position, adjusting distance, ending interaction. When agency is intermittently available, systems remain on alert, unsure when control will be permitted. When agency is consistently available, arousal moderates naturally. Regulation thrives where influence is dependable. Finally, stability is reinforced by meaningful endings. Endings that taper intensity, acknowledge completion, and restore neutrality allow emotional loops to close. Abrupt endings leave loops open, carrying activation forward. Over time, unresolved loops accumulate. Meaningful endings complete cycles and reset baselines. Calm follows completion. In the final layers of long-term emotional stability, one of the most decisive elements is the presence of interpretive clarity. Interpretive clarity means that situations can be understood without effort. Signals align, outcomes follow expectation, and context explains behavior. When clarity is high, internal systems do not need to overanalyze. Vigilance drops because interpretation is easy. When clarity erodes, effort increases even in simple situations. Emotional fatigue follows. Stability is not created by control or instruction, but by making the world easy to read. Environments that communicate clearly require less regulation because less regulation is needed. Closely related to this is the role of emotional proportionality. Proportionality refers to whether responses match the scale of events. Small changes followed by large reactions destabilize expectation. Large events followed by muted responses also create confusion. Emotional systems calibrate based on proportion. When proportion is reliable, internal prediction becomes accurate. When it is not, systems remain alert. Proportionality applies to tone, movement, timing, and consequence. Calm behavior emerges when reactions make sense in scale. Overreaction teaches hypervigilance. Underreaction teaches uncertainty. Balance teaches trust. Another stabilizing factor is cumulative coherence over time. Individual moments matter less than their pattern. One confusing interaction does not destabilize regulation. Many confusing interactions in sequence do. Conversely, one calm moment does not restore stability, but many calm moments in sequence do. Emotional systems integrate trends, not snapshots. This explains why change often feels sudden from the outside but is gradual internally. Behavior reflects accumulated data. Coherence must persist long enough to override prior patterns. Stability is statistical, not instantaneous. As environments evolve, adaptability depends on preservation of internal reference frames. Reference frames are internal benchmarks used to evaluate experience. They include expectations about safety, agency, and recoverability. When external conditions change but reference frames remain intact, adaptation is smooth. When reference frames collapse, stress spikes. Preserving reference frames requires carrying forward recognizable elements through change. Adaptation succeeds when something familiar remains to orient by. Disorientation occurs when everything changes at once. Another essential component of long-term regulation is predictable emotional neutrality. Emotional neutrality is not coldness. It is the absence of volatility. Systems relax when they know that nothing dramatic is coming. Consistently neutral presence often regulates more effectively than intermittent enthusiasm. This is because neutrality lowers variance. Lower variance reduces monitoring cost. Calm emerges when nothing needs to be watched closely. Over extended periods, regulatory confidence develops. Regulatory confidence is the expectation that emotional balance will return after disturbance. It is learned through repeated recovery. When recovery happens reliably, future disturbances feel manageable. When recovery is inconsistent, even small disturbances feel threatening. Confidence does not come from avoiding activation, but from surviving it repeatedly with resolution. Regulation strengthens through successful cycles. Another subtle but powerful mechanism is environmental forgiveness. Forgiveness here means that mistakes do not carry disproportionate consequences. When small errors are tolerated, exploration and flexibility increase. When errors are costly or unpredictable, rigidity increases. Emotional systems become conservative under threat. Forgiveness allows learning without fear. Stability grows where mistakes are safe. Finally, long-term emotional health depends on narrative continuity. Narrative continuity is the sense that experiences connect logically over time. Even without conscious storytelling, internal systems track whether life makes sense from one moment to the next. When continuity is present, calm dominates. When continuity breaks, vigilance replaces ease. Narrative continuity is built through predictable sequences, coherent transitions, and meaningful closure. It is not dramatic. It is quiet. When all these layers operate together, clarity, proportionality, coherence, reference preservation, neutrality, recovery confidence, forgiveness, and continuity, behavior becomes stable without effort. Calm is not imposed. It emerges naturally because the world no longer needs to be monitored so closely. In the final layers of long-term emotional stability, one of the most decisive elements is the presence of interpretive clarity. Interpretive clarity means that situations can be understood without effort. Signals align, outcomes follow expectation, and context explains behavior. When clarity is high, internal systems do not need to overanalyze. Vigilance drops because interpretation is easy. When clarity erodes, effort increases even in simple situations. Emotional fatigue follows. Stability is not created by control or instruction, but by making the world easy to read. Environments that communicate clearly require less regulation because less regulation is needed. Closely related to this is the role of emotional proportionality. Proportionality refers to whether responses match the scale of events. Small changes followed by large reactions destabilize expectation. Large events followed by muted responses also create confusion. Emotional systems calibrate based on proportion. When proportion is reliable, internal prediction becomes accurate. When it is not, systems remain alert. Proportionality applies to tone, movement, timing, and consequence. Calm behavior emerges when reactions make sense in scale. Overreaction teaches hypervigilance. Underreaction teaches uncertainty. Balance teaches trust. Another stabilizing factor is cumulative coherence over time. Individual moments matter less than their pattern. One confusing interaction does not destabilize regulation. Many confusing interactions in sequence do. Conversely, one calm moment does not restore stability, but many calm moments in sequence do. Emotional systems integrate trends, not snapshots. This explains why change often feels sudden from the outside but is gradual internally. Behavior reflects accumulated data. Coherence must persist long enough to override prior patterns. Stability is statistical, not instantaneous. As environments evolve, adaptability depends on preservation of internal reference frames. Reference frames are internal benchmarks used to evaluate experience. They include expectations about safety, agency, and recoverability. When external conditions change but reference frames remain intact, adaptation is smooth. When reference frames collapse, stress spikes. Preserving reference frames requires carrying forward recognizable elements through change. Adaptation succeeds when something familiar remains to orient by. Disorientation occurs when everything changes at once. Another essential component of long-term regulation is predictable emotional neutrality. Emotional neutrality is not coldness. It is the absence of volatility. Systems relax when they know that nothing dramatic is coming. Consistently neutral presence often regulates more effectively than intermittent enthusiasm. This is because neutrality lowers variance. Lower variance reduces monitoring cost. Calm emerges when nothing needs to be watched closely. Over extended periods, regulatory confidence develops. Regulatory confidence is the expectation that emotional balance will return after disturbance. It is learned through repeated recovery. When recovery happens reliably, future disturbances feel manageable. When recovery is inconsistent, even small disturbances feel threatening. Confidence does not come from avoiding activation, but from surviving it repeatedly with resolution. Regulation strengthens through successful cycles. Another subtle but powerful mechanism is environmental forgiveness. Forgiveness here means that mistakes do not carry disproportionate consequences. When small errors are tolerated, exploration and flexibility increase. When errors are costly or unpredictable, rigidity increases. Emotional systems become conservative under threat. Forgiveness allows learning without fear. Stability grows where mistakes are safe. Finally, long-term emotional health depends on narrative continuity. Narrative continuity is the sense that experiences connect logically over time. Even without conscious storytelling, internal systems track whether life makes sense from one moment to the next. When continuity is present, calm dominates. When continuity breaks, vigilance replaces ease. Narrative continuity is built through predictable sequences, coherent transitions, and meaningful closure. It is not dramatic. It is quiet. When all these layers operate together, clarity, proportionality, coherence, reference preservation, neutrality, recovery confidence, forgiveness, and continuity, behavior becomes stable without effort. Calm is not imposed. It emerges naturally because the world no longer needs to be monitored so closely. In the final layers of long-term emotional stability, one of the most decisive elements is the presence of interpretive clarity. Interpretive clarity means that situations can be understood without effort. Signals align, outcomes follow expectation, and context explains behavior. When clarity is high, internal systems do not need to overanalyze. Vigilance drops because interpretation is easy. When clarity erodes, effort increases even in simple situations. Emotional fatigue follows. Stability is not created by control or instruction, but by making the world easy to read. Environments that communicate clearly require less regulation because less regulation is needed. Closely related to this is the role of emotional proportionality. Proportionality refers to whether responses match the scale of events. Small changes followed by large reactions destabilize expectation. Large events followed by muted responses also create confusion. Emotional systems calibrate based on proportion. When proportion is reliable, internal prediction becomes accurate. When it is not, systems remain alert. Proportionality applies to tone, movement, timing, and consequence. Calm behavior emerges when reactions make sense in scale. Overreaction teaches hypervigilance. Underreaction teaches uncertainty. Balance teaches trust. Another stabilizing factor is cumulative coherence over time. Individual moments matter less than their pattern. One confusing interaction does not destabilize regulation. Many confusing interactions in sequence do. Conversely, one calm moment does not restore stability, but many calm moments in sequence do. Emotional systems integrate trends, not snapshots. This explains why change often feels sudden from the outside but is gradual internally. Behavior reflects accumulated data. Coherence must persist long enough to override prior patterns. Stability is statistical, not instantaneous. As environments evolve, adaptability depends on preservation of internal reference frames. Reference frames are internal benchmarks used to evaluate experience. They include expectations about safety, agency, and recoverability. When external conditions change but reference frames remain intact, adaptation is smooth. When reference frames collapse, stress spikes. Preserving reference frames requires carrying forward recognizable elements through change. Adaptation succeeds when something familiar remains to orient by. Disorientation occurs when everything changes at once. Another essential component of long-term regulation is predictable emotional neutrality. Emotional neutrality is not coldness. It is the absence of volatility. Systems relax when they know that nothing dramatic is coming. Consistently neutral presence often regulates more effectively than intermittent enthusiasm. This is because neutrality lowers variance. Lower variance reduces monitoring cost. Calm emerges when nothing needs to be watched closely. Over extended periods, regulatory confidence develops. Regulatory confidence is the expectation that emotional balance will return after disturbance. It is learned through repeated recovery. When recovery happens reliably, future disturbances feel manageable. When recovery is inconsistent, even small disturbances feel threatening. Confidence does not come from avoiding activation, but from surviving it repeatedly with resolution. Regulation strengthens through successful cycles. Another subtle but powerful mechanism is environmental forgiveness. Forgiveness here means that mistakes do not carry disproportionate consequences. When small errors are tolerated, exploration and flexibility increase. When errors are costly or unpredictable, rigidity increases. Emotional systems become conservative under threat. Forgiveness allows learning without fear. Stability grows where mistakes are safe. Finally, long-term emotional health depends on narrative continuity. Narrative continuity is the sense that experiences connect logically over time. Even without conscious storytelling, internal systems track whether life makes sense from one moment to the next. When continuity is present, calm dominates. When continuity breaks, Vigilance replaces ease. Narrative continuity is built through predictable sequences, coherent transitions, and meaningful closure. It is not dramatic. It is quiet. When all these layers operate together, clarity, proportionality, coherence, reference preservation, neutrality, recovery confidence, forgiveness, and continuity, behavior becomes stable without effort. Calm is not imposed. It emerges naturally because the world no longer needs to be monitored so closely.